Hi, thank you for joining us on episode 2 of the Summit series. Our guest today was Theresa Neate. Introduction on Theresa. Theresa is a senior engineering leader with a background in service desk, software delivery, quality engineering, and platform developer experience. She has written and talked on the subjects of lean, agile, quality, DevOps, and systems thinking, including contributing 2 chapters to a published O'Reilly book. Her career includes ThoughtWorks, Australia Post's Digital Delivery Centre, Digital Icon, REA Group, Director at Technology Consultancy Slalom Build, and Heads of Engineering at both Xero and then Grow Inc. Theresa is currently the engineering manager at Buildkite. Dan and I discussed with Theresa a number of fascinating areas in Theresa's career. It started with discussing Theresa's background in South Africa and a lot of what she learned, and it really shaped her leadership philosophy and career moving forward. We talked about hiring, we talked about diversity and why that's so important to Theresa, and we also talked about innovation and tech debt and how you balance the two. Please enjoy the episode with myself, Dan, and Theresa. What are some of your earliest experiences that have shaped you to be the leader that you are today, Theresa?
Okay. My experiences are we're all shaped by our experiences through life. So I like to tell people this story because it comes through in everything I do, and a lot of what I do now makes sense to people. I was shaped by being born and raised into apartheid South Africa, where the good fortune of the color of your skin, your ethnicity, and so forth were the doors that opened for you. And it really highlighted to me just the spinning of the dice and the spinning of the dial of where you land. Those are the cards you've been dealt, and now you've got to play this hand. And people do not necessarily realize that there are things we can do proactively as humans to make that experience better for other humans. So my approach as a leader is to take everyone at face value, to realize that everyone has a background, has something that has shaped them, has something that has disadvantaged them in some shape or form. And it is my job to open doors that have previously been closed, or to perhaps show them a door that they didn't know existed, whether that's societal norms, whether that's gender norms, whether that's economic situations, whether that's language. If you don't speak English, for instance, you're immediately disadvantaged. All of that was shaped by my experiences as a kid growing up in racist South Africa and realizing how amazing people were that looked very different to me. And I just never had the opportunity to form that bond with them until later.
Yeah, okay, wow. So that must have been a pretty full-on change to be moved to a different country and that kind of thing, right? What
change?
kind of, yeah,
totally. Dan, the change that happened was I was 18 and I went on a gap year to Los Angeles, to the US. And I was so naive. I didn't know what integration looked like, racial integration looked like. And it, for want of a better description, it was like a reprogramming that happened. I had to take a whole year to process the change that was taking place in me and to experience the how opportunity and how privilege presents itself in that context. So obviously then later on, as a woman in technology, you have other experiences that shape that. But that's where the reprogramming, so to speak, happened for me.
Yeah, wow. How long were you in the US for?
A full year.
Yeah. And did you go back to South Africa after that?
Went straight back to South Africa.
Yeah.
Nelson Mandela had just been released from prison, and we were put through a referendum on whether we will let our other citizens of the country who had a different skin color, whether we would let them vote. And thank goodness I had my awakening already, because I voted on the side of yes. I don't think I would have understood what it meant previously. Now, we voted for equal voting, and the next general election we had was voted Mandela into power, where thankfully the whole country had a say.
That would be pretty incredible to be as a part of a society that's going through that kind of change.
Yeah, I tell you what, you have to live something like that to experience humanity's beauty and the what bias and what privilege can be used to the detriment of others. So yeah, it's a continuing education. That wasn't the end of the education. It continues to this day, because now I see it. Now I can recognize it.
Has there been situations where I guess you may not want to give like super specific examples. I know as a leader, sometimes I'm conscious of this as well when I'm talking about things publicly, and there's a lot of experiences I have with people where I'm helping them, coaching them, mentoring them, and helping them move through to some of those examples you said early on, where you're helping them change or to be able to achieve something. And some of that's personal to them, not necessarily to me as the leader in my role, right? But do you have an example of, how the connection between like who you are and what that makes you to be, and how that expresses itself in terms of when you are mentoring or coaching people? Can you dive a bit deeper into that for us?
Absolutely. Because I do understand that humans are complex, and apples are not apples, and everyone is a different being. I spend a lot of time getting to know people. What that looks like in practice is, when I start working with someone, is I get to understand their communication style. I get to understand their personal backgrounds, because as we've just discussed, everyone is shaped by something. I get to understand their introversion or extroversion, how they like to engage with humans, their values and their drivers, and then I shape my conversation around those. I don't treat it like a cookie cutter. You are a software engineer and you will now do these things, and we're all little robots. I look at the human, and then I shape the conversation around the human. And every person I speak to is incredibly interesting once you get to know who they are. And if you become interested in them, and if you're asking for an example, well, I've spent, there's one example. There's a lot of examples. There's one I can share with you where this person started reporting to me after a restructure, and they were fairly resistive, because at some point in time I was their peer and now I was their leader. And I made a point of just getting to understand them, their drivers, and some people might call that unproductive, quote unquote, because we're not talking about actual work. But once I understood where they were at and what made them happy, I made it my job to work with them on these particular items. Bearing in mind, I'm still the leader. I'm still responsible for the overall picture. I'm still responsible for outcomes. And the conversation will be around outcomes in the work and their personal interests. I never talk about outputs, because that's wasted. That's wasted energy. Let's talk about outcomes. And once we're aligned on that, then the conversation becomes easier and easier. And this particular one, though resistive at first, once they understood I was there to have their back, it changes the dynamic immediately. I'm not there to challenge their role or their seniority or anything. I was there to have their back, but I had to earn that respect.
Has anyone ever said to you that some of your styles are unproductive when you made that comment?
Yeah, I don't think anyone has said it to me, but I've certainly had a manager or two never talk to me about me, but only talk to me about my work. And their, let's call it framing, was, we want to be productive. Let's talk about the work you are doing. They didn't know whether I drank tea or coffee. They didn't know that I don't do mornings. Mornings are hard. And they didn't know anything about me. And so the conversational became quite transactional. And to my mind, their attempt to talk about the work and the outputs was their attempt to be productive, to talk about productivity. But you weave those conversations in and you talk about outcomes after you've established trust. So it hasn't been said to me directly, but it's certainly been implied that that is someone's leadership style in managing me.
Yeah, well, how important is it to have an environment where you're able to pull from things that give you the energy or the resources and stuff you need to be you as an effective leader? Can you tell us a bit more about that? What kind of things do you need around you, do you think, to be at your most potential?
I do extremely well when, this is super corny, when I have autonomy. I don't do very well when I am micromanaged. There is a demon that wakes up in me that is me at my most rebellious. When someone micromanages me, I will do my best poker face and I will try and carry it like a champ, but I become disengaged. And then they will comment on the fact that I've become disengaged and try and address the fact that you've become disengaged. And now we need to micromanage that. For me, I need autonomy. Obviously, I need aligned autonomy because free range autonomy is unproductive. So we need aligned autonomy. So there's a beautiful sweet spot between striking the right level of alignment conversations. Let's talk about what we're aligning on and let's let you do your thing and then come back to align again and align and realign and realign. So that's me at my best when I'm treated like a responsible adult and I have autonomy and purpose and I have the drive to do the job that I've been assigned to do or that I've been hired to do. So yeah, micromanagement definitely brings out the version of Theresa that I don't want to employ myself.
When you mentioned being yourself is important, right? And being able to express yourself and people knowing you, etc. Did you learn that from knowing what not to do? Or are you sort of mirroring a leader or someone that you had earlier that showed you the way?
It's a combination of both. I feel that we are always modeling behavior to others. And I learned that because I'm always watching other people. And I notice how they make me feel. I notice how uplifted or squashed I feel after an interaction with someone. So you learn those behaviors and then you take away lessons from books you read and you do exploring yourself and you look at how you personally respond to things and you form your leadership based on that. I will say to you, 30 years ago, at the beginning of my career, the behavior that was modeled to me was to be dictatorial and militaristic. And the first time I became a leader, I was dictatorial and militaristic. In spite of my experience as a South African with the equality and everything, I'd seen this behavior modeled to me. I thought, cool, that's how you're a leader. That's what you should do when you're a leader. Off I went and I did that, and I didn't have great results. But maybe that's just bad luck, you don't realize that you have an impact on people's productivity. And then I had the total opposite with a leader who talked to me like they cared about me. And they asked me what I wanted to do and what I needed help with. And I went, holy smokes, I feel really good after that. I'm going to try that because I went away from leadership because clearly I failed at the last one. Came back to leadership with a renewed approach to leadership and had a very different approach. And I would say, Kris, in answer to your question, it's based on continued enlightening, reading, learning, continued growth mindset, as well as learning from the behavior I've seen modeled to me by people that I thought were doing fabulously or not so fabulously as leaders themselves.
I'm kind of fascinated by something. We probably share the same philosophies in leadership. And I find for myself as well, autonomy is this big thing. Whereas if it's not in play, I'm in a place where I'm not functioning as my best as a leader either. Do you think they're linked together? Is it like for you to operate with the philosophy of leadership you have, do you think there's maybe a connection there where it's like, this is part of the formula that is important to actually operate like a leader like that? What do you think?
I do, but there's an asterisk to my answer. And the fine print at the bottom says that people have misinterpreted autonomy and servant leadership to let the kids run free, let the people run free, do their thing, and you know, we hire smart humans and they will figure it out, and we as leaders can just check out and have no involvement. So there's a beautiful balance there where you're autonomous, but you still have support and you still have alignment and you still have guidance when you need it. So when someone newly joins or becomes a leader, they're promoted into leadership. Many of them put servant leadership. I'm a servant leader in their title or in their bio, and that's cool. But the word leader is still part of that equation. So yes, I love autonomy. I love alignment. I love support and guidance when I need it. But then let me off the leash and let me run when I'm good.
Yeah, cool.
Autonomy is important, but also the alignment with the business and the decision makers as well.
I have opinions about companies publishing their values and saying we are a blah blah company or we're a blah blah company. And to me, the proof is in the pudding. I am very suspicious. I'm a skeptic by nature. I'm suspicious of claims, marketing claims about their employer branding or their values. I go to the horse's mouth and I ask the employees, for real. Let's not publish a survey that you all have to fill in and say nice things about this company, and now we've won an award and yay. Let's rather have an honest, transparent, authentic conversation about how your experience is in the workplace. And even when they say we have autonomy, listen, I have a lot of background in QA. I'm going to suspect there's something wrong with that statement. And I'm going to think that, what do I not know about this particular statement? So, Kris, even when people say they provide autonomy, I didn't even pay attention to that. I didn't pay attention to it. I didn't feel like there's a breach in contract when there's no autonomy because I didn't believe you in the first place. I need to see it.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's when if someone keeps saying something over and over again, I'm a servant leader, I'm a servant leader, I'm a servant leader. They're usually not, right? So
Trying
no,
to convince themselves.
this is it, yeah. Or if you're saying, oh, my approach is honest, it's honest, it's honest. Eventually, why do you have to keep saying that? Just let it speak for itself, you know. I want to actually go back a bit if possible. I'm fascinated by your story, your experience in America. How do you go from there to getting into technology? How does that happen? Like where does it begin?
Technology started long before I left home. For me, I was raised by this magnificent single parent mother who was in that age really groundbreaking by being a programmer in her day job. And she brought home this, please don't laugh, this Pentium machine that was just the bee's knees. And I just wanted to work on this machine. It was, whoa, it was so ahead of its time. And I learned to write basic code, command line basic code, and command line DOS long before Windows existed, long before any user interfaces existed. And it was purely because I had access to it. So there again is a theme where if you have access to something, you can develop an interest into it. And just because I had access to it, I developed that interest, then was given the opportunity to move to a technical high school where they taught computers for the first time. It was the first time they were teaching computers in high school in South Africa, and I jumped at it. And I did it in my year 12. I did computing in my year 12. So there had already been a seed planted through my teens, through my last year in school. Then I took the gap year and just went and studied humanity. Then I came back and I did a computer science course, which was a super dodgy course, but I did the course, and it never left me. The interest and the logic and the beauty of computers never left me. And I took a very sort of nondescript, or let's call it a non traditional route into my current role. And having explored a whole bunch of things along the way, but computing was, the seed was planted and the light bulb came on because my mum exposed me to it as a young teen.
And do you think it was also, like, the interest is important in the accessibility, but do you think it was also what you saw it do to your mum in terms of like, light her up and she was fascinated by it and there was a real positivity towards it?
I was too naive to notice what it was doing to my mum. I was just fascinated by this thing, this shiny thing that I needed to know more about, that I wanted to explore. And that probably helps to have an explorative mind and a growth mindset mind. That's what got me through that. But she made it available, and I had the ability to log on back in the day when they didn't have usernames, when the machine just loaded, you know. Yes, I had the access, and being able to play with it all the time is what made me into who I am today.
I have similar experiences when I was a kid as well. What do you think about? Be interested to know what you think about these days, today, modern times, in air quotes. Like, what do you think is different about that for kids now? How can they have similar experiences or similar formative things that lead them into, say, technology as a career? What do you think?
Whoa, I have a lot to say about that. Because I hear very often that the problem with having enough women in technology is the pipeline, and there's something wrong with the pipeline. My opinion is that there is very little wrong with the pipeline. The problem, in my opinion, is the societal norms of what girls do and what boys do. And that starts at home. And the language around, I want to be an engineer because my father was an engineer as a boy. And I want to be a nurse because my mum was a nurse as a girl. That starts at home. And we are absolutely overloaded with opportunity and potential in our current society, where schools and Australia has fantastic schooling, amazing schooling. Schools expose these kids to all of these avenues. Where it breaks down, in my opinion, is where societal norms and expectations of you have to become a doctor or a lawyer or a something because your family did it or because you're the first person to have a degree. That's where, to me, the problem lies now. The opportunities and the exposure are 100 times better than I had as a kid. And, you know, this is where you show your age when you say you have it so good because, you know, when I was a kid, oh, it was so bad. Honestly, the problem is not the opportunities that kids have these days, unless they are economically disadvantaged and they cannot purchase the equipment that they need. So there's a little bit of a class discrepancy that occurs here, where the norm, the general populace have access and opportunities, and then there is a disadvantaged group that don't have access and opportunities. And that's potentially where I think we need to do the work. That hasn't changed throughout the ages, but I do feel that is the area that currently closes the door for people, in addition to the societal norms about what your gender, your ethnicity, or whatever it may be dictates for you.
I guess there are certainly patterns where parents play a large role in, I guess, teaching their kids. I've got a 13-year-old boy, and it's only that. So that's the limit of my experience in parenting. But it's interesting, I think, from an early age. I suppose my wife and I probably made quite a big point of exploration, I suppose. Like, so some of the things you're talking about, where it's like there are all these potential things to investigate or to explore or to try to understand and see where things go, I guess. But I wonder that, like, obviously that was an intentional decision, I guess. Rightly or wrongly, we'll find out in like 20 years whoever he grows up to be. But I think that was an intentional decision from us to say, we want that to be instilled in him as a value, that he looks at the world in a certain way. And unfortunately, he probably won't be an engineer, but yeah, that's okay. He's going to make his own path, right? But I think, that exploration means that, I guess it's kind of interesting, right? We are sort of letting go in a way, because we're saying, look, explore all these different options. And I'm not saying to him, you must be a software engineer. And my wife and I are very different as well, like different skill sets, different views. We share a lot of the same values as well, but there's a lot of differences. And I'm sure that he will borrow from both of us in different ways. I guess that has a very big impact though on someone when they're young and they're looking at the world and they're growing and they are seeing things with their own eyes, but parents are certainly putting an interpretation on it for them or helping them understand what they're seeing. What do you have any ideas or opinions about, because if I even look at Australia, right, Australia on the world stage in terms of technology, I would say, sometimes I read, there's a guy on LinkedIn who is from the US, but he kind of pays out the EU a lot, like saying, oh, you European Union whippersnappers, like you should get better like us US, like, we're the tech gurus and stuff. He does it tongue in cheek, but it's funny watching that interaction between Europeans and Americans, right? And I'm sitting there as an Australian thinking, we are just like this little pea in the soup of the world of technology. But I'm always like fascinated in how can we as an industry, or even like say it's encouraging parents to approach things in a certain way with their kids. Like, what do you think about that? Is there a way that we can, I mean, this is looking forward ahead a generation maybe, right? How do we help parents in their roles to help kids adopt this exploration approach to things like technology?
Well, therein lies the answers to the universe, Dan. I heard someone say, may have read it, that each generation is always fixing what their parents did. Every generation is fixing what their parents did. And every parent is doing their utmost, is doing their best for their kids in the context and in the moment that they're in. And so therein lies a takeaway that you're going to do things wrong, and we can't future spec this and create the perfect outcome because we don't know what we don't know. And my recommendation is provide the opportunity, provide the access, allow the conversation to take place, challenge biases, which I feel we can do better at, and raising awareness around bias. We can't eradicate bias. It's a human condition. It's going to be with us forever, but we can improve our awareness of bias. And with that awareness, it is the least, that's literally all we can do right now, is give people access, improve the awareness of bias, and don't judge someone by their skin color, their background, their education. So again, we're talking about biases here. Get to know each individual for who they are. If we can teach our kids that, to not judge a book by its cover, but to learn and explore and to develop and to have a look at biases and to excavate the unknown, that's the best we can do. And in 20 years' time, our kids are going to say to us, you did this wrong, and you did this wrong, and you did this wrong, and that's okay. At least we did the best we could in the moment. Give them the opportunity and the knowledge. Knowledge is power. Give them that knowledge to make the decisions intelligently.
Yeah, cool.
What would you say to people that are listening? And I know we've spoken about this offline, right? And there's a lot of talk about it, as you say, pipeline issues. There's obviously a huge problem with diversity and how this works, especially from a leadership perspective and how skewed it is, right? But I think some people maybe want to try and help and don't know what to do, or maybe are afraid of it and don't want to talk about it, whatever. What do you think are the small things or large things that people can do day to day to actually make a contribution or a difference? Like, what could they take away from this conversation that can start moving in the right direction? Because you've got to start somewhere, right?
You do. And The answer is not to hire more interns, to hire more junior women, which many companies are doing under the banner of, we're going to hire junior women and then we're going to train them up, and that's going to be the answer to our gender issues. The answer to me lies in doing a deep study on power dynamics and power imbalances, which goes beyond gender. It also looks at race. It also looks at countries of origin. At some point in time, women were computer programmers because the men didn't want to be computer programmers. And I'm very cautious of using this term because I'm not that militant about this particular situation, but let's call it the patriarchy. And I'm using that kindly with you in the room as my allies. The patriarchy has had a power imbalance of dominating the paths for people of different ethnicity and people of different gender. To me, truly, the answer lies in understanding power dynamics. It really does begin there. You can't fix it by hiring more graduates. Yes, you don't fix it because women leave technology. They leave. They won't stay. So let's fix the power dynamics and let's all become aware of that. And then you will see women being attracted to the subject, and they'll become attracted to the area, and they will remain in the area, and they'll have opportunities to have kids and come back to the job and not be excluded from the job once they've gone away to have kids, because that power dynamic excludes them from staying in the game.
Yeah.
That is my answer to that.
It must be, I have obviously zero experience of this, but it must be an incredibly difficult decision because you have this career trajectory and you also have this decision that you have to make, and you have a timing situation. And no matter how good you are in your job, a break of doing that job will ultimately harm you versus someone on the same trajectory that doesn't take a break, right? And
Yep.
it kind of compounds over a period of time, right?
It does. It compounds, and you then have the societal expectations of a woman to do the caretaking, the housekeeping, the pickup of after school, before school. They need flexibility. They're not always given that flexibility, so the only option they have is to leave. There is something to be said for making this a fair game, not in the Australian fair game context, but this has to be a fair game to play where the rules apply to all players in the game, not to 50% of the players who don't have the biological makeup to grow a child, to then look after the child, to then nurse the child, which is entirely associated with your biological composition. It's got nothing to do necessarily with your choice. It's just the cards you've been dealt. Let's talk about the power balance here and how to make this a fair game for all players in this game, not just the ones who've always been at the front. I have seen, even when we give women the advice that you don't need to be perfect to apply for the role, I've seen them get weeded out at the screening stage because they don't meet the criteria of the role. I would encourage recruiters and hiring managers to become better at recognizing potential and becoming more willing to invest in potential. When you invest in that potential, it then, like an investment, returns dividends. And it might be a slow burn, like the stock market is too, or any other investment is a slow burn. And you have to be patient with that investment. But don't look for the perfect candidate or the perfect applicant or the perfect robot. Hire for potential. It's difficult because you don't always have people hitting the ground running. So you need both. You need people who hit the ground running to get the work done, and you need people who are hired for their potential, who then, through the skills and the potential that they bring, then uplift the rest of the group, because diversity, by the way, increases the ability of the entire group. So when you bring that diversity into the group, beyond gender, we're talking now about skill set, we're talking about potential, the entire group benefits from it. For me, let's look for potential And let's look at the willingness to invest in potential and make it a long-term investment, not expecting that they're going to be a doctorate degree qualified within 2 weeks.
It's kind of diversity of thought as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting that ticking boxes on requirements for a role. My personal perspective is it's not even possible. Like, could you get someone to tick every box? I don't know. I don't even think it's realistic. You're always, I think, setting sure, there might be a desire and an ideal where you're like, this is like the perfect person to come and fulfill my role, but that doesn't really exist. That's not reality. But what I have found is that what people bring to their roles, last night I hosted a workshop as well where we're talking about this topic. It's like, even if you don't tick all these boxes, or even if, people want you to be in a box, there's something about each person that makes them unique, which is based upon, so like, even your experiences you were talking about, Theresa, like your background, your experiences, the roles that you've done previous to this, those moments of interactions and things that form you and your thinking and your skill set and your opinions, all that stuff. These things, if you combine them, they are unique. They make you a unique person because no one else has had those same first person experiences, right? And the more you gather, like the more, segments and attributes and stuff you gain. And I think so last night we were talking about how do you present yourself in a resume? That was the context of what we were talking about. And I was kind of saying to people like those bits that make up you as this unique unit, that's the bit that you want to say, this is me. And no one else has this, like no one else has this unique combination of particular skills and superpowers that make up me. And so I guess I've been encouraging people to say, like, make that like why you're exceptional in this role. Say you're applying for a role. Hey, I'm exceptional for this role because I'm A, B, and C, and no one else has this. And I think what that means is that in a group of potentials for a role, you stand out as, I mean, you still have to, there's a baseline, of course, for the skills for the role and all those things, but I'm talking probably about this flavor of you and what you bring. Because I've had people in roles that, sure, were not perfect ticking all those boxes, but instead brought something that, like, a team of people are all, a mix of strengths and weaknesses, but they're trying to figure out together how to be a team unit, how to work effectively as a team. And I think the process of working together as a team is to, like, everyone knows what other people's strengths are. And I think that element of understanding that in each other is how the team works to be successful together. Because they're like, when we need this as a team, this is our go-to person. And when we need this, we go here. And that is like an effective, I think, unit of, using the resources that are available to a team, leaning on each other, developing, helping each other's strengths, like picking up for other people's weak areas. That, I think, is an awesome team expression, and would be like, that's the team that's going to be successful and get the outcomes. In your experience, Theresa, is that a common thing? Do you see that as a shared philosophy across leaders? What do you think?
I'm not convinced that's a shared philosophy, but I definitely align with that philosophy. I suspect that we are still in the mode of factory production line widget productions, where all you need to do is produce your widget and put your piece on the conveyor belt and let it move down the production line. The dynamics of, I was talking to a colleague earlier today, the dynamics of, for instance, a sport team is that everyone plays a different position and brings different strengths on the team, and that we can't all be goal kickers because then no one's going to play defense. And having that diversity, that holistic view of a team is how I operate. And I look for skills and attitudes that we don't have on the team, and I welcome that. And I don't subscribe to the culture fit idea where everyone is the same. I look for culture add and I look for skills add. My view is that recognizing potential is half of that battle, is because you don't always recognize what this person can bring to the table. You just look at the hard skills and the checklist items that they do bring. And leaders like ourselves who have been in this game for a while start learning that you can't homogenize your workforce. You can't homogenize your team. Our life depends on the diversity of the skill set and the approaches and personality styles. If you look, for instance, at the 360-degree wheel, everyone has their place in that wheel to make this a full perspective, a full view. So let's play that. Let's fill in the gaps. Let's not try and be like some unicorn that doesn't exist, or some goal kicker who is now kicking all the goals. That is not how we play a team sport.
It's fascinating to me that I always kind of joke, it's a little half a joke of like when we were, so this is earlier in my career, when you're on the tools and you're coding, if you're a software engineer, and you're dealing with computers, and even when we were young, let's say, right, and you're dealing with computers, and there's a very logical thing. It's very straightforward, and like, A plus B always equals C, and that's the way it is. And you learn those patterns, right? But when you come into leadership out of being technical and hands-on, people instead are chaos. Or if you think about like a system, right? A system of logic and a system of chaos, because people don't work like a computer. And it's very interesting what you're saying about that, the widget line of creating those widgets, and everything's the same. It's a process. And actually, I have noticed in some areas or some roles where I've been more exposed to other parts of the business, let's say like finance teams, those kind of things, it is still process driven for them mostly. Their role doesn't change day to day. It's like I make sure this pile of bank statements or something is reconciled in the system, and that's what I'm doing, right? How do we reconcile the differences, I guess, across an organization, right? You have different cross-functional areas, teams, leaders, and surely there would be, or is this expression of these differences, is this like a clash that, like, when you have maybe teams that are more process, although still teams have to work together, and there's still that team element, I think, where you have to understand each other and work together as a team, and that still requires people to have empathy for others and all of those factors, right? But it's interesting what the analogy you were talking about, where this is not a world, when we're building software, this is not a world of a widget line. This is like an innovation thing. This is something where we are creating something that doesn't exist. Every time we go to tackle something, we have all new playing fields. Like, our constraints are always different. Usually the playing field is always different, and you can't actually, even if you had the same tech stack, let's say, it's still different, because a different team of people built this tech stack over here and this one over here, and they might be using the same tools, but they're completely different. How do you view that? Like, I guess, the conflict between those worlds. What do you imagine maybe the solution is, or the approach is? I know this is not a I don't think there's any easy answer, but I'm interested to hear what you think.
My view is that Taylorism, industrialism has shaped the last century into the way we do work. And the Industrial Revolution changed all work into factory production lines and being productive and measuring things. And thank goodness there were humanists among us who challenged that, and people who were interested in the whole, not just that one step. And I feel that there will always be a push and a pull here of people who are humanistic in their work and people who are industrial in their work. And Taiichi Ono, for instance, came along and changed the way Toyota did their production line, because he had a humanistic and a lean and let's cut out the nonsense kind of approach. He was that innovative person. And perhaps we don't need that innovation in balancing our books, for instance, but we do need that innovation in how we write software and how we manage teams. And the more curious people and the more hungry for knowledge people will be the ones who will find these alternative ways of working. And let the others do what they do. And it certainly gives us fodder for research, and it gives us fodder for real life experiences that we then use as examples of how we'd like to do things better. The entire a lot of my thinking is based on lean and just doing whatever works, and not wasting time and not wasting energy and not doing something for the sake of a process, but actually applying it to the context. Now, there are people like me in the world, and then there are people who don't need that kind of thinking. And let's call it a yin and a yang. This brings balance to the conversation. It keeps us on our toes and gives us stuff to work with.
It's funny. I have a friend who is in engineering in gas and water and things like that. And sometimes he has been to meetups of mine where we discuss things like innovation and agile and lean and things like that. And he kind of jokes like, if I built my gas systems that way, like people would die.
Yeah.
It does put a new perspective on the value of processes that have been created over time for the purpose and are effective. But maybe that's a good example of effectiveness, I guess, right? Like to your point, that what's effective in that world is going to look different to what's effective in ours. And that's fine. That's all good. But maybe I do like your point to say that what is effective in all this. I tend to think about things the same way as well. I think sometimes maybe it's a human thing. Sometimes humans, maybe some say, oh, I'm doing agile now or whatever, and it's kind of like, I've made it. I understand what agile is now. So like, it's like, yeah, I understand it all. I've got it all covered. But I don't, it's not going to stop anywhere. I don't think. Like, why would we stop at agile? Why would we stop at a certain point? I think that
Right.
continual view of thinking what's effective and what's working and what can we borrow from to learn from and incorporate here or experiment with, to always be improving or to get a better outcome. I think that's a really great way to think about it.
Well, you make an excellent point, and one of the reasons why I'm staunchly anti-cult is you lock yourself into a way of thinking that doesn't allow you to challenge and to grow. And whether it's a religious cult or if it's a capital A agile cult, whatever the thing may be, let's be pragmatic and let's be innovative and let's do what works in this context. Let's not sign up for the rules and use them as a whip for someone to do something better. Let's do what works.
How are you prioritizing innovation at the moment whilst trying to like focus on like technical debt and other issues that may hold that innovation back?
There is a concept in lowercase agile that talks about your sliders. You kind of figure out what your priorities are at the moment. And the premise is that if you have three, a slider, which is just something on a board, if you have 3 or 4 values, let's call it innovation is one, the other one is technical debt reduction, and maybe something else could be customer value, who knows? Let's say we have those. They can't all be equally important. And my perspective is that one has to be more important than the others, and one has to be less important. And you have to be able to shift your priorities based on the context of your situation, whatever that may be. You've all heard the quality versus price versus time triangle, the cost and the time and the quality. You can't have it all. You can never have it all. You've got to be willing to negotiate and flex. So, Kris, my long answer really is it depends on the context of your situation. Because I am a systems thinker and I do think of consequences as everything I do, it could be a bias, but I will never be in favor of not talking about tech debt. Got to talk about tech debt because, like all tech debt, it accrues interest and it's going to bite you in the ankle later on if we don't do something about it right somewhere along the line. So let's have a plan. We can innovate, but do we have a plan for the tech debt at minimum? And if we don't innovate, we die. So we've kind of got to do both. So we're going to walk and chew gum here. I would never trade off one for the other in its entirety. People are subjectively impacted by things that make them happy and things that make them hurt. And if you're hurt by tech debt, you are probably going to talk about tech debt more. If you are happy about innovation and doing shiny things and you don't know what happens when you leave something behind, then innovation is your thing. I would say that as a society, we have a bias for shiny things. We're magpies, we're little ostriches or magpies, depending on which one you prefer. And we like to chase the shiny thing, whether that's Gen AI or other AI or I remember, back in the day when business intelligence was a shiny thing that we all had to do. And because I'm a skeptic or perhaps a pragmatist, I go, cool, love your shiny thing, get over the moment, get over the excitement. And then we're going to do some real work after that. So I love innovation, but I don't do bandwagons. And I don't religiously support something because it's a new thing. I don't chase a certification because everyone needs to have a certification. I care about long-term value, return on investment, whether that's through innovation or reducing tech debt. That's what I think we need to care about. Let's not think about the short-term shiny things. Let's think about the long-term investments that we are making. And do your experiments. Like we have to experiment short-term. Otherwise, we don't know. But don't get caught up in something because it's a buzzword. That'll trip you up for sure.
What inputs are you receiving, or what signals are you looking for as a leader to know where that line should be, where that balance should be?
Well, there's a book called Beyond the Hockey Stick. I think that's what it's called. I will quickly verify that before I lead you down the garden path. Strategy Beyond the Hockey Stick. And everything has a curve. You're going to be on a curve of a hockey stick of experimenting, your early adopters, then people loving your product. These are all signals. And it gives you a sense of the lifestyle or life cycle that you're in, the stage of the life cycle you're in. And it should lead you to thinking about what is next. Don't be so in the moment of enjoying that moment that you're not thinking about the strategy beyond the hockey stick. So I use the input of the adoption of the product, of how we are currently doing. I use the input of the customer satisfaction. I use the input of, if we're talking about a product now, I'm looking at revenue, and you will see a curve. You'll see a life cycle occur with each of these. You then need to figure out where you're at in that life cycle to know what is next. And this book was recommended to me by my previous CEO at Xero, Sukhinder Singh. She's magnificent. And she came in, she was hired into this role to talk about Xero's next phase, your next life stage beyond this fast adoption, this fantastic growth that you've had. What happens after that? So for me, this is a awakening on, we can't all ride the wave and write cool products and then we're famous and Bob's your uncle. There's a life cycle that takes place, and there's a sunsetting that takes place, and then a new rebirth that occurs after that.
Amazing. Dan, anything else that you wanna cover, or should we?
No, I think that's amazing. Yeah, thanks, Theresa. That was
Excellent.
great.
Thank you.